Entertalk Radio, you're in to all things music.
May the best brand win with Scott Robertson's Music Biz Marketing Strategies. Now, here's your host, Scott Robertson.
Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. You are tuned to May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media, the undisputed leader in music biz talk. And I am Scott, your host, and a man who thinks that decaf coffee only works when you throw it at someone. And with me, as always, is my own personal Garth, Paul B. at Entertalk Central in beautiful San Diego, California. How are things, Paul?
Pretty good. Getting into my Friday here.
You know, it's the longest day of the year, and it's a Friday.
It feels like it.
It is the first day of summer. It is the summer solstice today, and it's it's the longest day. Does it feel like the longest day so far at work for you?
So far, yeah. It's gonna be a long one.
I hear you. Well, sweet. Well, you guys are smart because you tuned into a good one. This is episode 128 of The Big Show. So who am I? What do I do? I run a PR firm in Orange County, California. The way to reach me is basically our website, which is robertsoncom.com, 2 M's like communications, Twitter at robertsoncom, 2 M's, and then also on Facebook, facebook.com/robertsoncom. And, like I said, you're smart because this is episode 128. We call it Crisis Me a River. And, in this day and age where it seems like everybody is just sitting around by their computers waiting to be offended by something your company said or did, crisis public relations is pretty important. So joining me on the program is crisis PR expert David Oates. And Oates, he helps organizations repair their brand reputation in the press and online. He can handle any crisis PR situation and train other people how to do it themselves. As a U.S. Navy public affairs officer and corporate PR pro, he dealt with a broad range of crisis PR issues like mass layoffs, large-scale accidents, product recalls, inappropriate acts by executives, and more. And so David is on the program today, and he and I are going to tag team winning and losing. And before it's all over, he's going to leave you with some great crisis PR tips. So welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen, David Oates.
Hey, guys, David? Thanks. And I'm on my 128th cup of regular coffee today, so it's actually apropos, I guess.
Nice. I like it.
I love people who say, "Oh, I drink decaf coffee." Oh, that's cute.
That's cute. Decaf coffee. That should never have been invented. We could cover that in the next segment. But we'll be like losing this week. Decaf coffee, and all of you who drink it. What the hell's the matter with you anyway?
Whoa, what's the point? Just drink water.
Well, cool. Well, so let's just dig right into it. So the topic today is crisis PR. And this show, I cover on a weekly basis a lot of things that have become crisis situations for companies that have done a lot of stupid stuff. So, with all the stupidity in the world, I'm guessing your business is booming, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's
gotta be.
It's been pretty good. To your point. If you looked at crisis PR as a profession 15 years ago or so, it would be limited to larger organizations, right? Organizations that would have gotten the ear of the newspapers or television 6 o'clock news or something like that. But now any organization of any size can go from hero to zero in an Instagram post. And I literally have served $500 million distributed manufacturer companies down to an independent veterinary shop that just got besieged on Yelp through a client that believed that veterinarian did harm to their animal and literally sent them into, just a panic mode of how to answer, the type of comments that their other clients were seeing online and what did that mean and should they be concerned? And so, literally any business from your mom and pop store to the big global conglomerates will probably deal with some sort of communication crisis, some sort of reputation issue that will have them stop doing what they normally do and have to answer to mail to employees, customers, partners, investors, a whole slew of audiences that they just didn't have to do before. Yeah, business is good.
Did you get Joe Biden as a client yet? I can see a lot of work coming your way from the Joe Biden camp because that's a factory of stupidity. Yeah.
But Biden, Trump, Kardashians, it's all the same train wreck. The problem is you have to have a client who's able and willing to be trained. And I think anybody in the political or reality TV mode, or in this case, you've got people who've been in both, just love the limelight, and they don't mind taking their reputation and just absolutely trashing it. And for those people, you just stay as far away from the blast zone as you can.
Oh my God, so true. I talked about that last week on the show. I talked about, Joe Biden coming out and saying that, if you elect me president, I'm going to cure cancer. And the whole world was like, I'm sorry, what did he say? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. That's not the job. The first thing that occurred to me was I was like, wow, the job description for president has gotten really, really wide now. You're curing, they're curing diseases now.
And I get where he's coming from, right? I mean, he lost his son due to the same brain cancer that Senator John McCain died, and
sure.
I had an uncle whose dad's not. So you have to at least in those kind of situations, if I was his handler, you have to say, look, this is obviously personal for him in every sense of the way, and then remind people that there's a funding initiative that the Senate put together, and they called it the Beau Biden, after his son, the Beau Biden moonshot to cure cancer in 10 years. So, but when you take it out of context like that, it just sounds like, to your point, it sounds like a 76-year-old who's just gone off the rocker. And that doesn't really help you as you're launching your presidential campaign. I mean, it's not any no dissimilarities to when people get ticked off about Trump's sort of tirade on Twitter, and you're like, is the guy unhinged? When you say things like that, you have to put it in context, because other people will take that and run with it if they're not understanding it. And then the next thing you know, you're getting blasted on so many different social media channels for what's perceived to be just a complete, loose cannon. So I don't know what to tell them.
So true. So true. Well, let's get into these days, what constitutes an actual quote unquote PR crisis?
Yeah, I think most people still look at, when you say PR crisis, as something that appears on, CNN, Huffington Post, or something like that. And I would say you've got to look at it from a broader context. Any organization that has to answer to a public about a perception that isn't aligned with their values and takes them away from doing their job, from delivering their product and services, or delays sales, delays revenue, or impacts profitability, has to be categorized as some sort of crisis. And that's because it can come from so many different communication angles. We are now inundated as a consumer in a wide range of ways we get information, whether it's still the traditional airwaves, or Sirius XM, or podcasts, or Instagram, as I mentioned, or LinkedIn, or so forth like that. It can come from any direction. And if you as a consumer see something about a brand that has you going, wait, what? Like the Biden case, let's say, or other organizations. If it stops you and go, wait, what? I don't understand. What is it that you're doing, and how is that different? I don't understand where you're coming from. Now an organization has to stop what they're doing and explain to that public what they really meant, or whatever. So I think that constitutes a crisis. And so what that really means for organizations is that you've got to be prepared, much in the same way you're prepared for disaster recovery on any level. You've got IT recovery plans. You've got, if you're in manufacturing, you have production and fulfillment recovery plans. You should have at least crisis communication plans, contingency plans, where you know who gets involved, who approves messages, and in a timely fashion, and gets it disseminated in whatever channels you feel necessary, and train to that like you would any disaster recovery plan, because it'll happen on a moment's notice, and it'll come from an angle you weren't expecting.
Yeah, absolutely. So you help companies by monitoring for crisis events that might affect them, right? Yeah. So what does that entail?
It's really not dissimilar to, I think, how digital marketing agencies will monitor chatter of an organization. So I use several different tools, all of which are monitoring both offline and online chatter. So I've got social media monitoring tools where I use specific keyword hashtags and different handles of organizations, but also of their industry and, if appropriate, their competition. Because sometimes a crisis event can happen through no fault of an organization, but somebody else, some other rival gets caught doing something and now puts the entire industry in question. Like, I'll give you an example, like credit monitoring services or something like that. Or if somebody is declared a fraud and you say, oh, all lawyers are crooks, or things like that, right? So if you aren't careful, you could get sucked into something like that. So I do that with various social media tools, but then I also will have services where I get regular reports about things that may be appearing in a print newsletter or community newsletters, things that aren't necessarily immediately online. And you do that because, again, the potential for a PR crisis can come from so many different angles that weren't present 15 years ago, that you have to be mindful of that. And the last person who should know if somebody is questioning their brand should be the customer, should be the client, right? Should be the organization. And my job is to alert them to that so that we can respond. Because the other side to this, and I'll leave this topic, is you had one news cycle to respond. So if something went down at 6, 7 o'clock at night, you would have until the 5 o'clock news the next day to craft your answer. Well, you don't now, right? Somebody's going to post something at some point if they're questioning it, and you got 10 minutes, you got 15 minutes, maybe, before you've got to have an answer. Because by that morning, it's wildfire. I had a case where a T-shirt manufacturer here in Southern California had somebody take their T-shirts and position such a way in a store that became a racist statement. Now, the company didn't do anything about that. They didn't authorize that. It was somebody who took liberties with their product and their point of purchase display marketing tools. And one tweet had it going viral that at 7 o'clock at night here on the West Coast, they're getting a call from the New York Daily News, 3 time zones away. The next morning, it was on all the networks. It was in the UK, at the UK Daily Mail. It was on TMZ the next night. And this was a tweet that occurred late in the afternoon, West Coast time. So well into the evening on the East Coast time. That's just the nature of the business now.
Scott Adams says that, Scott Adams and his podcast, he's a master of persuasion, so some things we do. Mm-hmm. And Adams says that now there's like a kind of an unwritten 24-hour rule that, especially if somebody says something stupid or tweets something stupid, that basically they have 24 hours, in his opinion, they have 24 hours to clarify, correct that, what they've said, before there's judgment. And I'm kind of like, well, I can kind of see it. He's giving people like that 24-hour kind of leniency to correct. But the world isn't quite as sympathetic as that. I think so.
No,
it's interesting.
With all due respect, I think it's an hour. I think it's an hour. I think it's 2 before judgment happens. I saw that with this T-shirt manufacturer. So here it is. This one tweet starts to get on the news. And within moments, they started getting hateful emails of people, just general people from across the world, calling them racist and insensitive and worse things, dropping F-bombs and all that sort of stuff within an hour or 2. And we had to answer every social media post. We had to answer every email, in addition to putting out the press release, working with the media. It was an all-hands effort. And the story died within 48 hours. The news cycle, the traditional news cycle, died in 24 hours. The emails and the social media posts ended in 48 hours because we got ahead of it and answered the mail in terms of, look, we didn't know about this any sooner than you did. We neither condone it nor authorize it. We apologize that it happened. We're taking steps to make sure that the people who denigrated our brand don't do that again. And we moved on. But it was an immediate response that we had to do within an hour of us knowing it. We did not have 24 hours.
Cool. We got about 3 minutes left in this segment, but I want to hear about how you got into all of this. What's your story, and how'd you find your way into crisis?
I'm a lucky son of a gun. So very quickly, as you had pointed out, I was a Navy public affairs officer. I was first a Navy surface warfare officer, and then halfway through a 9-year career, I had the opportunity to be a Navy public affairs officer. And the Navy trains you to do a lot of different things, but they also give you ample opportunities for real-world experience. So I learned from people in an apprenticeship-style format. I was on an aircraft carrier for 2 years. We dealt with everything from aircraft crashes to criminal charges placed on sailors and Marines when we were in foreign ports of calls, to oil slicks, to other international instances. And you learn by doing. And I had probably the best training I think any public affairs and PR person can have, and that was with the United States Navy in a forward deployed operation. So, and then I've been in the corporate sector for 20 years and have, got my MBA in 2004. And so I've been able to take that baseline training and channel it into corporate America for nonprofits as well. And I will tell people I'm the luckiest guy in the world to do what I do.
Nice. Well, you mentioned apologizing, during the crisis you were talking about. It seems like everybody's apologizing for something, and we've only got about 2 minutes left. But in that last 2 minutes, in your expert opinion, what makes a great apology?
The first thing you have to be is sincere. You have to recognize that the people who are expecting some sort of apology, and to use it in very broad terms, want to know that they have been heard and they've been respected. Now, when you give the apology, this is the second important part, you don't necessarily have to admit culpability. That T-shirt manufacturer is a perfect example. So we apologized that it happened, and I went a few rounds with the CEO because he was saying, why am I apologizing? I didn't denigrate our brand. I didn't use, position our products in such a way as to be racist. And I said, what you said and what we wrote in that statement was you apologized that it happened, acknowledging and being empathetic to people being ticked off from what they saw. You were just as ticked off, and you're going to take action from that. But you have to apologize for people having been put in a position to feel that way. And I think that makes a great apology. You have to acknowledge the other people's feeling and be empathetic for that. You can do so without necessarily admitting culpability if none is to be taken.
And that's a way to stay married too, right there. Knowing that, even though, because dude, it's not your fault. I mean, let's be real. It probably wasn't your fault, but if you don't acknowledge that it made her feel that way, you're screwed. I mean, there's no way out.
I have been 24 years of marriage, and I think I finally learned that about year 23. I swear to God, I get myself in more trouble. I should take my own class, right? Year 23 out of 24. I'm just now starting to figure it out.
And that's a crisis. That is a crisis that you will not recover from. Your butt will be sleeping on the couch until you realize that it was probably your fault. You probably did it. And even if you don't feel that it was your fault, it's just a good idea to go ahead and apologize anyway. I mean, honestly, it's just a good idea to go. I think so. We got about 10 seconds left, but we can kind of go out.
Go ahead. I was a foot taller earlier, and now I'm shorter because of all the years of marriage.
And you're listening to David Oates right now on May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media, the undisputed leader in music biz talk. Come on back. David and I are going to hit winning and losing this week. See who's winning and losing. See you in a few.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al Di Meola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Hi, I'm Tim Dolbear, the host of Sound Experience on Entertalk Radio. Each week, I talk with top professional audio engineers, producers, musicians, and the manufacturers that make the tools that we use in the studio each and every day. From capturing the perfect take to mastering your final release, and the tools and how the pros use them, we are going to dive deep into their process and learn from their experience. I look forward to you joining us each week on Sound Experience with me, your host, Tim Dolbear.
Make this your vinyl night. I'm John J.R. Robinson, and every week, music creation comes alive through stories, experiences, and sounds when vinyl records filled our hearts and minds. My friends and I share our tips and techniques used in creation of iconic tracks for recording artists such as Michael Jackson, Eric Clapton, Quincy Jones, and Steve Winwood, to name a few. Vinyl has emerged hot, and the soul of vinyl defines art and passion which burns deepest at night. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on EntertalkRadio.com.
May the best brand win with Scott Robertson's Music Biz Marketing Strategies. Now, here's your host, Scott Robertson.
Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. Happy summer solstice, everybody. Happy Making Music Day. You are tuned to May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media, the undisputed leader in music biz talk. I'm Scott, your host, as always, hanging out with crisis PR expert David Oates today in the virtual studio. How's it going today, David?
Yeah, it's good, my friend. Happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday. Happy Friday. As I mentioned, it is actually, today is the summer solstice, longest day of the year, and it is actually National Make Music Day. So in the musicians of the world, a lot of whom listen to this show, this is the day where we sort of encourage people to, the idea is there's all these music events that go on all over across the country where people are encouraged to play music. I'm celebrating in my own way because my band is playing at a dive bar in San Clemente tonight. You know, we all have our various ways to celebrate. But anyway, it is National Make Music Day, so a lot of fun. So David's hanging with me, and now for this segment we're talking about crisis PR all day, but we're gonna dig into who's winning and losing this week in the wide and wonderful world of marketing and communications. So, we got to start off with it's the first day of summer, and Dairy Queen is giving away free ice cream to celebrate the first day of summer. So basically, if you download their app and you get a coupon where you can get a free, small, regular, or dipped cone. The dipped cones are amazing, by the way, with any purchase all day long, right? So you suffer through whatever food item they have, and you get the dipped cone, all day long today. So that's winning right there. So I will encourage you right now to download that app and then go get some chicken nuggets, which will not be the best chicken nuggets you've ever eaten, trust me. But you do get the ice cream, and that's sort of important. David, what do you think of the first day of summer and some free ice cream from Dairy Queen?
First off, I'm with you. I love Dairy Queen's ice cream, but yeah, their food, only in an emergency.
I don't know, man.
But
yeah,
huge winner. Yeah, huge winner. You're right. I mean, first off, how much free publicity have they gotten to basically give away a free dip cone that you have to purchase food items for, right? And the second thing is you have to download their app. So guess what? You're giving them all your information for that, and they can push this out for it. This is about as cost-effective marketing PR engine that you could find. All the free publicity. They didn't have to pay for any ads. You're going to get the real estate of people for the cost of a very inexpensive pennies gift cone for them. This is brilliant. Yeah, they should. If they could do it probably multiple times a year, they would. But this is perfect.
Right, and a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, it was National Donut Day, and same thing. Krispy Kreme is giving you like one donut, and the idea is like you're not going in and buying. Nobody goes into a donut shop and buys one donut. That does not happen. You're getting some coffee, you're getting a dozen donuts, you're getting something else. If you have the discipline to go in, that's like the kind of person that wins like at blackjack in Vegas and like folds over the money and walks out of the casino. That's like 1 out of 900,000 people would do that. Everybody else is betting again.
Exactly. It's like the McDonald's Happy Meal, right? That they still do there. Why? They don't make any money on the Happy Meal, but for every Happy Meal they buy, they get mom or dad's buying a Big Mac with a supersized fries and a McCafe, triple shot sugar-free soy vanilla latte or whatever it is. They're making bank on that kind of stuff. This is perfect.
It's perfect. We both agree that one's winning. Definitely. It's like the Siskel and Ebert of marketing and winning and losing PR stuff coming up.
Yeah.
So my next one is So Gibson Guitars is now suing Armadillo Distribution Enterprises, which is the parent company of good old Dean Guitars, for trademark infringement. for counterfeiting, for unfair competition, for trademark dilution, and just for being, bastards in general. There's a legal term for that, but that's what they say. And of course, Armadillo Enterprises, which I actually didn't know about Armadillo Enterprises. I always thought that Dean was just Dean, but Armadillo, which owns Dean, says, we believe that Gibson's claims are baseless and we will vigorously defend ourselves. Now, here's what's interesting. What they're suing about is the shape of the Flying V guitar, the Explorer, the ES and the SG body shapes, and also the Dove Wing headstock design, and a couple of different names that have sort of been loosely adapted and taken to the Dean family. Now, as long as I have played guitar, been in the music industry, I know that there are lots of companies that sort of have their own Flying V and sort of have their own kind of SG and have their own Explorer and have their own kind of stuff. So it's interesting to me to see why Gibson would go after Dean, when other people kind of do it too. And when Dean has been doing it for so very long, Dean has had a Flying V guitar for decades, and so I don't know. It's this potential legal battle is kind of interesting, right? From a crisis, perspective, it starts making headlines, and then both sides have to sort of make their claims, in kind of battle in the press before they battle in the legal courtroom. I don't know. What's your take on that one, David?
I think this is a big time loser for Gibson. I think they just caught themselves in something that was stupid to get into. Here's why. First off, if you look at the background of the story, you're right. The distributor has had this type of design for 40 years. So now Gibson is claiming copyright infringement. It just looks like Goliath going after David. And I think it was indicative of the fact that their new brand guy had to pull the threatening video that he had about, we're coming after, we're protecting our iconic brand. I get it that they have a brand that is renowned, but I'm sorry, iconic? Well, they declared bankruptcy and only came out of it a year ago. So how iconic is that? When they've had to basically ask for the federal government's assistance to bail them out. So I really think that they have just stepped in it. And unfortunately, this is a classic example of how a company thinking that they're under siege when they're really not creates a crisis of their own doing that now is going to be very difficult for them to unravel without having cost them some profitability and certainly some revenue. I think this one's going to hurt them for a little while. Whether it'll hurt them long term or not, I don't know, but it was certainly unnecessary. And Gibson's a loser on this one.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. And also I think that, Gibson players and Dean players aren't necessarily the same level of customer is another thing I would say.
Sure.
Dean guitars are less expensive. They sort of, I don't know. They kind of have a little bit of a dirtier brand. You know what I mean? They have at the NAMM show, they have, spokesmodels that walk around in little hot pants and stuff. And they kind of have, they kind of have that brand, which is great. If you're Dean Guitars, you're out there sporting the Dimebag Darrell brand and you're pushing that. Dean Zielinski was certainly, an icon of the industry and all that kind of stuff. And, Gibson is, a much larger company, like you said, Goliath. And now, and it's just kind of like, I don't know how the judge doesn't sit there and go, why now? Like you said, I mean, why now? It seems like an odd thing to come back to. And like you said, all anybody's going to be talking about is, after, Gibson's made a few positive news statements, coming out, saying we're going to focus on guitars and that kind of stuff after dragging themselves out of bankruptcy and all that kind of thing. And then they start making news in sort of this unflattering way. I can't imagine that being, a win, against somebody like Dean. Yeah.
Again, look at the definition of PR crisis, right? Something that takes you away from actually fulfilling your product and service and getting out. And to your point, Gibson made mention about how we're going to focus on guitars, building quality guitars, and we're going to take care of our customer. And then they do this little sideshow. Well, then what did they say? What they say was truthful? Because it doesn't look like that they're focused on putting out great guitars. It looks like they're trying to step on somebody that, your point, is well taken. Probably isn't even in the same market for guitar customers. So, big loser.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. Well, let's. In my next story, so a story came out in Business Insider that I thought was kind of fascinating this week, and it's 10 companies that you've never heard of, or they control more than 50 of the biggest restaurant chains in the world. And I direct everybody, if you want to check out this entire story, it's really kind of interesting. It has a really cool graphic that makes sense of it too. If you like the pretty pictures, this one's for you. Go to Business Insider and just find out the 10 companies that you've never heard of that control the brands. But basically, it shows that these holding companies, for these brands like Yum Brands and Sun Capital, a lot of capital, Golden Capital, Rourke Capital, Brinker International, all these kind of things. They own all the restaurants that we eat at that are chains. From KFC to Johnny Rockets to Olive Garden to, Seattle's Best Coffee to Buffalo Wild Wings, which had a crisis today because they found a big rat at a Buffalo Wild Wings, and it's like totally going viral, by the way. You should check that one out too. Red Lobster, Outback Steakhouse, Burger King, Popeyes are all owned by these 10 companies. And and kind of like the show we did a little while ago that basically said that, 5 or 6 companies control all the major media outlets in this country today. There are 10 companies that control more than 50 of the biggest restaurant brands that are out there. So if you say, well, I'll just take my business elsewhere, it's like, well, you're just taking it to another another capital company. Apparently, you're taking it to the next venture capital company. But anyway, it's a fascinating read, fascinating story. Like I said, I don't know how much if it's necessarily winning or losing. It may be losing in the fact that we only have 10 companies that control all of these food brands, and if they consolidate any further, it's going to be like the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie or Sylvester Stallone movie that came out where they said now all restaurants are Taco Bell. It's like it could be that someday. So who's to it?
Yeah.
What'd you think of this story?
I think this is a push, right? I don't think that it has much in the way of being a winner or loser. Now, here's what I would recommend if I was the corporate communications person for any of these holding companies. This is the only place I would ever want to see those companies named again in an article, because the one possible issue that could arise is, to your point, let's take the Buffalo Wild Wings rat issue that occurred in Houston today. Well, if it looks like that they're basically just one flavor, if you will, of the Arby's and Rusty Taco and Sonic that the Inspire Brands controls, well, then it could actually get people to be concerned about, well, if there's rat at a Buffalo Wild Wings in Houston, does that mean I'm going to find a rat at a Sonic drive-in in Pomona, or a rat in an Arby's in Baltimore? I mean, so if people start looking at the corporate brand as the dominant brand and everything else is just sort of different variants of that, like different flavors of a Lay's potato chips, you might run into issues. So I would say that if they're spending any money on the holding companies for brand value, stop and allow these brands to be separate, because then you can control the risk of a crisis cascading to your other assets. That would be my one concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, isn't the FTC supposed to watch out for like large monopolies of restaurants? I guess 10 companies doesn't make a monopoly of these kind of things, but if they, there certainly has been a great deal more consolidation on restaurant chains and things, retail restaurant franchises and those kind of things than I think most people are aware. I don't think they're aware of the consolidation and the fact that most of these companies that you eat at regularly, the chains, are owned by these capital companies, right? So it is fascinating.
I think that is fascinating, but I also think that it would be tough to do a monopoly type of issue or concern with these brands, because I'll give you a case in point. We look at Yum Brands with Pizza Hut. I think the big argument is that the biggest competitor to Pizza Hut is your local pizza shop, right? The independent guy who's been having, who's had the pizza place for 20 years or whatever like that, that's takeout, that's as close, if not closer, than the local Pizza Hut. So, that's fine. I personally prefer the local pizza shop and the local sandwich place than I do anything else. But,
the chains. The chains.
When I'm on the road or something like that, and like I've got to get something quick, or I'm going to meet somebody that, for a business deal, I'll go to the established brands because I don't know the town or I don't know the areas, but I know at least that I'm going to get a certain amount of quality or a certain amount of service. But beyond that,
no doubt.
it's all good.
Well, let's move on to Google. So Google this week said that they have the answer to the Bay Area's housing crisis. They are going to spend $1 billion to ease the housing problem in the San Francisco Bay Area, where they have been headquartered for the last 2 decades. They said they are going to pledge $1 billion to build a total of 20,000 homes in the region over the next 10 years. And it comes as Google and a lot of tech giants face criticism for contributing to the higher rents in the Bay Area. Here's what I'll say about this one. It's a little weird. It's a little weird. It's a little like, the Jim Collins Good to Great book where it says, be a hedgehog and sort of do the thing that you are known for doing. And then all of a sudden you're like, and now we're donating money so we can build houses and we're going to solve the housing crisis, which is not what you're known for, which is nothing that is your core competency, which is kind of, I don't know, it kind of falls into corporate responsibility, but it's also kind of a weird, odd play. I don't know. What was your feeling on that announcement?
I think it's a big time win. And here's why. If you really look into the story in some detail, there's 2 things. First off, they're not writing $1 billion check. Because what they're first doing is they're taking $750 million worth of their property that they own and they're converting it from commercial and office space to building housing units. So it really comes down to a $250 million investment is what they're penciling out. Now, here's the 2 things. One is people are telecommuting more. People are using less office space. Cubicles are getting smaller. You have distributed office environments. You've got shared office environments. So their requirement per square foot per employee is less than it's ever been before. So they've got this excess space that they might as well convert to productivity and revenue. Well, how do you do that? You got to get more bodies into your company at a time where it's really cost prohibitive for people to be, in the San Francisco Bay Area scene. So what they've done is they've basically taken this excess asset and they've created a revenue line out of that. Because if they get people who work for Google into their campus, they will work longer, they will work harder, they will feel more stable. And so for what is already established sunk cost and a little bit of modification, they're going to see a several-fold return on their investment for that. And to your point, they're getting some great PR out of this from what is perceived to be a corporate social responsibility. But I think this makes absolute business sense and great PR and is a great ROI. This is a huge win, and kudos to Google for, again, figuring out how to solve a problem through a different set of eyes. So, yeah, this is perfect.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting, and I encourage anybody that wants to check out the rest of this story. We've only got about 15 seconds left, but if you want to check out the rest of this story, it's written up a lot of different places, but the write-up from CNET was pretty good, so definitely check that out. And we're going to come back in the next segment, and we're going to give some of David's tips for how you manage your very own PR crisis. And right now, you are listening to May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media. Come on back. We're going to give you those tips. See ya.
I'm Tim Dolbear, the host of Sound Experience on Entertalk Radio. Each week, I talk with top professional audio engineers, producers, musicians, and the manufacturers that make the tools that we use in the studio each and every day. From capturing the perfect take to mastering your final release, and the tools and how the pros use them, we are going to dive deep into their process and learn from their experience. I look forward to you joining us each week on Sound Experience with me, your host, Tim Dolbear.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
Make this your vinyl night. I'm John J.R. Robinson, and every week, music creation comes alive through stories, experiences, and sounds when vinyl records filled our hearts and minds. My friends and I share our tips and techniques used in creation of iconic tracks for recording artists such as Michael Jackson, Eric Clapton, Quincy Jones, and Steve Winwood, to name a few. Vinyl has emerged hot, and the soul of vinyl defines art and passion, which burns deepest at night. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on EntertalkRadio.com.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al Di Meola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording number one hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
May the best brand win with Scott Robertson's Music Biz Marketing Strategies. Now, here's your host, Scott Robertson.
Hey everybody, happy Friday. You are so smart because you are still tuned to May the Best Brand Win on Entertalk Media, the undisputed leader in music biz talk. I am Scott, your host. Hanging out with me is David Oates, crisis PR expert. Still there, David, having fun?
Yeah, I'm having a blast. Thanks for the time.
Nah, absolutely. And Paul B is still out there somewhere, or maybe asleep at the board at this point. What's up, Paul?
I'm here. I'm awake.
What'd you think of winning and losing this week, Paul? What'd you think?
Gibson.
What?
Gibson.
Jeez, sad, right?
Yeah.
Now, are you a Gibson player or are you a Fender guy?
I'm more of a Fender guy.
Yeah, I thought so.
Oh, what's wrong with Taylor guitar? I'm from San Diego, right? So Taylor.
Yeah, Taylor's great.
San Diego.
Yeah.
Okay,
Taylor, they're more of an acoustic brand.
More of an acoustic brand, yeah. For your electrics though, you're more of a Strat guy than Paul.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the situation, obviously, I like them both. I've never owned a Gibson. I have a Les Paul Epiphone. It's a cheaper knockoff, but it gets the job done.
Sure.
Got it.
I have a Gibson Les Paul, but it's so heavy. It's like one of the heaviest instruments, and I'm a bass player, and I say that it's way heavier than any of my basses.
even the Epiphone is pretty chunky.
It's a piece of wood, Jack. People don't know when you strap that thing around your shoulder. You're like, this is there's some heft to this thing.
Yeah,
that's fairly true. Well, cool. We're hanging out today, like I said, with David, and he's kind enough to give us. He's going to walk us through some tips for you, the audience at home, in case you run into your very own crisis of your own. So David, this is kind of how to handle a crisis PR event. You kind of want to give us some steps, right, of what you do, kind of first, second, third. So what are your steps?
So there's 5 steps, but let me put this all in context for a second. If you have something that's emerging, you really only have an hour or maybe 2 to get all of these steps at least set up, if not fully executed, because time is of the essence. We talked about that in the first segment, Scott, where we said, look, if an Instagram post or an errant review post, you don't have 24 hours to respond to that one. It's not the normal news cycle it was 15 years ago. Everything starts to go viral instantaneously, and so you've got to get your ducks in a row. But to put it into 5 steps, the first thing you've got to figure out is what is going to be your statement and your key points you want to convey. And in all of those key points, you want to make sure that you state what's happened to the extent that you know it. Leave open certainly potentials to update and impacts as you know more data. But in all of these situations, you want to demonstrate, as we talk about, empathy and action. And again, when we say empathy, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be apologetic or take responsibility for something that isn't yours to take. But you do need to acknowledge that people in a crisis situation are going to feel, at the very least, anxiety, if not just complete anger and ticked off at you. And so acknowledging that, making them feel like they have been heard, is essential in your statement. So you got to get that going right away. And then identify in step 2 the individuals that you will have be your spokespeople. And that could be not just for news media, right, the traditional media, but you also want to make sure that your employees, your customers, your partners, if you have shareholders, board members, are given information. And I would submit... Let's
go back to step 1 just for 1 second. Let's go step by step. So on step 1, one thing that I noticed was, one weird one that I'd like to get your opinion on. Remember when the San Bernardino shooting happened? Terrorists broke in and there was that shooting. it seemed odd to me that the president of the United States, Barack Obama comes on the air and is basically blaming guns within 2 hours of it happening. And I remember saying this, and it was like, well, yeah, we've, the guns in this country and this kind of thing. And like, he has this real anti-gun, statement that was like right off the bat. Right. And I was thinking, just with my crisis PR hat on, I'm kind of going, wait a minute, they haven't even determined, who this was, how this was, anything. And we're at the blame stage. We've like shot right past everything. And it just was, it was just a really strange one. That kind of came out. I don't know how you felt about that one. That one was a one I always kind of think about when you're saying state what happened to the extent that you know it and that kind of thing. And it's just like, but maybe be right, or because it turns out these people were terrorists and guns wouldn't have, none of that.
I think you need
relevant.
to look. Yeah, I get where you're going. I think you need to look at the White House as not somebody who is trying to get the information out to be factful or truthful. Or,
yeah, true.
I guess supportive, right? I don't mean to say that the past administration wasn't truthful or wasn't factual. People will argue that, but I don't really want to get into politics on either side. But Barack Obama in the White House, much like this White House, and quite frankly, every White House, at least in modern time, has a position, right? Has an angle, and I think the thing you got to look at with that is the audience for this one was in many respects San Bernardino Police Department and the law enforcement and the local community, and that the White House was playing the role that we see all the time where people will take an incident and then create a narrative on that. So I think the White House saw that as an opportunity to define a narrative that may or may not necessarily have anything to do with the facts, right? And we see that with this current administration. I mean, it's just part of politics. So I think that if you think about it from a crisis PR standpoint, in this case, let's say the public information officer for the police department and the FBI, you are going to be creating a statement that talks only about the facts, and you will have to create those messages and think about the Q&As for when other organizations will take advantage of that and start to look at it as to what is it that what is it that people will try to leverage this, and how do I continue getting the positive information out there? So I appreciate you stopping me and asking me that question, because I think it's a perfect example of why you have to get these statements and Q&As done right away, because somebody's going to try to set the narrative for you.
Absolutely. So, so step one, we're stating what's happened. We're leaving open potential to update impact or whatever is being affected. Step two, what are we doing in step two?
Yeah, so as I started to say, you got to identify the people who are going to speak. And one of the things that I think people start to look at is, well, who's going to be the spokesperson for news media? But those individuals, or at least other individuals, are just as important if they're conversing with employees, customers, and partners. You've got to recognize that there will be multiple channels you're going to have to disseminate information. You want to make sure that those individuals who are identified are trained in public speaking, who have at least an understanding of the statements and the messages, who are prepared for some of the questions that might be asked, and are ready and able to respond at a moment's notice, and then get them ready to go there. And if you don't have them trained beforehand, you're going to have to do some real, what I'll call patchwork media training beforehand. The real step is make sure that you have people who are trained in the art of public speaking and media relations and employee communications and customer communications as a normal course of your operations, so that they are ready and able to go when a crisis gets hit. But yeah, identify who those people are and channel conversations to those designated spokespersons.
So it sounds like it might be smart for organizations to identify those spokespersons before a crisis hits, right?
I think it's essential. And it's the same thing that we talked about in the first segment, where because of the immediacy of the way crisis communication occurs now, because of an errant Instagram post, you really have to be prepared for a crisis event as you would be prepared for any disaster event in production and customer fulfillment or things like that, cyber breaches, that kind of thing, because the chances are any organization can go from 0 to 0 in an Instagram post. And the time to wonder what your plan looks like and who's going to talk is not when the crisis occurs. It's well beforehand. So, yeah, I think it's essential.
All right. Step one, we generate our statement. Step two, we know who our spokespeople are going to be. What's step three?
Step 3 is getting that information out. And
Sure.
I would say at an absolute minimum, even if you decide that the press isn't necessarily needing to know right now because it's not an issue and you don't want to necessarily make a mountain out of a molehill, you need to get your employees to understand what's going on. And then your customers. Don't let those two audiences hear about an incident from the newspaper or from an online source like the Huffington Post or some LinkedIn comment. You want to tell them directly. They need to feel like they're empowered and that people are looking out for them. It's going to be essential on two fronts. One is your employees are on the first line of communications. Whether or not they're designated spokespeople, they're the ones talking to your customers. They're the ones talking to your partners. They're the eyes and ears of what your brand is being perceived by your intended publics. And so to not arm them from that puts them at a succinct disadvantage. United Airlines did this, if you remember, when they dragged that passenger off of that plane, and they did a press statement, and that was it. Well, all the employees were left basically hung out to dry for the next day when customers came up like, are you going to drag me off the plane too? And then because they didn't respond to the customers directly, you saw video footage of several people just shredding their frequent flyer cards online because they just completely ignore them. You've got to make sure you get information out and start with your employees and customers first.
And is this a good time? One thing, is this a good time to just like have your marketing language, and here to where it's like, hey, we're, at Uber, we're transforming the digital economy by blah, 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 BS. I mean, do you want to have all your marketing BS in this, or is it better to be like super direct and speak like a human being would speak?
I think you called it, right? I mean, you talked about it. It's BS, right? And all due respect, right? Taglines are great, and believing in a particular vernacular and statements are important. But when it looks like you're hiding behind them and you're just not being candid and forthright, again, showing empathy in action in your crisis communications. You don't do that by shielding yourself behind a slogan, behind a tagline, behind some sort of industry buzzword term. Just be frank with them. People really appreciate when you're candid and forthright. And we've got studies that show customers and employees will give organizations a second chance if they just feel like they're just being honest and they're just being forthright and candid. And putting in all your marketing speak because you're trying to remind people who they are, that's just crap. You're just going to get burned.
Exactly. And how many things do we see, as marketers that are just, that were like written by the marketing department and like legal blessed it or legal added a bunch of different words so nobody knows what the hell it says now. And it's just like, and then you read it and you're like, I don't know what this says. And it's just, and so I think what you're saying is it's better to be clear and direct and let's just say honest, as much as possible. And then, and I totally agree with you. Getting to the employees and your customers first is really strategic because the first people that the news media are going to go to is probably not you. It's probably going to be people, it's probably going to be, they're going to go to those people or they're going to interact with those people first. So, well, cool. That's step 3. So what's step 4?
Step 4 is a little bit of background preparation here. You have to be prepared for what I call the gotcha questions. There are questions that could come from reporters, but oftentimes come just as many from customers or partners who ask what are uncomfortable questions at the best case scenario, and worst case scenario, they're leading questions that have an underlying bias. They have already presumed your guilt. And so the questions will say, things like, well, how long have you been stealing from us? And things like that. And you have to be prepared to answer those in a very candid, forthright way, but also don't get riled by them. Be sincere and honest. I think a lot of organizations get into trouble from CEOs and other spokespeople because they take their work personally, right? Most organizations, if you're in a leadership position, the work is the extension of your personal self. So when you're asked a gotcha question, you take that personally, and you usually get into either a fight or flight mode, right? You either come back, guns a-blazing and fists flying, or you just crawl into a bunker and close the door, and hopefully, the fires run over you. None of which do you any good. So you got to be prepared for those gotcha questions and how to answer it. That's step 4.
And you know what? So I went to journalism school, University of Missouri Columbia, and one of my classes was we practiced questions that would get an emotional response. So media are practicing screwing with you. Believe me, they're absolutely practicing how to get a rise out of you. They, media study psychology so they can get the content that their audience wants. And it's a big win for them when your CEO loses it, and does something like that. So I completely agree with you. Media training is a great cure for this. You practice those questions, so how long have you been a racist? That kind of thing, and teach people how to bridge out of that kind of stuff and stay on their own message. It's really, really important.
I don't know if it's necessarily that they're trying to screw you, but I think that they're trying to capture the eyeballs. And in this day and age, when I literally have several different apps, of which are somewhat news, but probably more entertainment. Their number one goal is to make sure I don't click onto another app, or I don't go to another page, or I don't click another channel. How do you do that? You generate the emotional response. I mean, it's the same reason people slow down when there's a wreck on the side of the road, even if nobody's hurt, right? Yeah. We all slow down because we want to look at the train wreck. That's what we do as a people. So they're just doing what they think is going to get the eyeballs.
Exactly. And like I said, and it's training too. Like I said, when I was in journalism school, I remember people going over and saying, well, how would you say this that would get a better, a more interesting response out of something? That's how they said it. How would you get a more interesting response? And you're like, and so anyway, it's kind of interesting. People don't know that's how journalists are trained, but they are. Tell me about step 5.
You got to follow up with other announcements. You got to keep people informed as to what's going on, if that's necessary. Usually in a big crisis situation that's full-blown, you've got media inquiries coming in, you got emails and phone calls coming in, your customers are irate. One announcement is enough. You've got to set a follow-on communication timelines, cater those different messages and different statements to these respective audiences, and stick with it. It doesn't mean you put out stuff that's not actual information, but you can't just decide, okay, we put out this information and now everybody just go away and we'll close the doors and we'll go back to that. That doesn't happen. You've got to restore the trust and the confidence that people know that you are still empathetic and that you're taking action and that you're following through on that promised action. Because if you don't, you're going to be perceived as being not forthright and could possibly be a liar. And that's only going to cascade this to a catastrophic level that I've seen it, where organizations literally go out of business or change the type of services that they offer, or come to be a smaller amount. Because if you just do one and think that you're done with that one, well, good luck. Crisis stops being a crisis when you're back to normal operations, not because you say so.
Nice. Well, that's a good step 5. Well, what have we learned today, class? We have learned that there's a lot of stupid in the world, and blocking all of it in the world requires people like David Oates up there on that wall, ready to get it done for you. So, David, thanks for being on the show. And how do people get in touch with you if they want to?
Hey, best way to do so is through the website. It's publicrelationssecurity.com, publicrelationssecurity.com. You can also email me, David, at publicrelationssecurity.com. I'm at Oates Stalwart and PR Security Services Twitter. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks very much, David, for being on the show. That's it for me, folks. Until next time, this is Scott Robertson, host of May the Best Brand Win, only on Entertalk Media. See you next week. Bye-bye. You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Entertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear from Eclectica Studios. I'm a full-time mixing and recording engineer. I work with Grammy winners, labels, and indie artists, using state-of-the-art digital mixing and restoration tools and the very best in analog gear. Really, though, it's my ability to bring tracks to life and fulfill your vision for your music. This has made me sought after by producers and artists worldwide. So spend your time working on music and not chasing a mix down a rabbit hole. Go to timdolbear.com and check out our free one-song mix offer.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al DiMeola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?